All right, good afternoon. So today's speaker is Robin Edelstein. She received her PhD from the University of California, Davis in psychology. She went on to do an NIH postdoctoral fellow at the University of California, Irvine. And then the University of Michigan was lucky to hire her soon after that. And she's been here since 2007, became a full professor in 2020. She's been doing some really exciting work, some of which we'll hear about today, on testosterone and the role that testosterone plays in close relationships in both men and women. So welcome, Robin.
Thank you. All right. Ooh. So really, this is not too loud. This feels very loud. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rich. So I'll be talking today about some of the work that I've done over the last couple of years on testosterone in the context of close relationships. And I want to just zoom out a little bit just to give you some context of the sorts of things that I study. So this is a snippet from my lab website. So I think sort of at the heart, probably at my heart, I'm a personality psychologist, so I'm often drawn to questions about why people differ from each other and how and what that means. And so typically I'm looking at that in the context of close relationships, and then a bulk of my work adds this hormone piece to it. So there's sort of, you'll see aspects of these different pieces today. So I want to start just with a couple of popular media depictions about testosterone. And I think if you, probably especially recently, look at the way that testosterone is portrayed in popular media and popular culture, I think it's easy to get the idea that this is, first of all, a hormone that is really only important for men and in fact may be problematic for women. And the message is often like the more the better. Like low testosterone is really the thing you want to beware of. More recently, this is beginning, again, getting even more popular attention. Tucker Carlson created a documentary called The End of Men, kind of bemoaning the decline in testosterone kind of over the last couple of decades, which does in fact seem to be a phenomenon. I think that he takes a couple of extra steps then arguing that this is a huge problem. And then he has some recommendations, not at all signed on by any medical professionals, of how you might want to address testosterone declines. And even more recently, I've just come across this in the past couple of weeks, that there's been more of a discussion about testosterone, about women, middle-aged women taking testosterone supplements. And this was really striking to me, partly because it wasn't on my radar, and I do study this, and I imagine I get a lot of targeted ads. I'm surprised that this hasn't kind of crossed my Instagram feed. But one thing that struck me, so it seems that there is a phenomenon that a lot of women in middle age are taking testosterone in part to increase sex drive. Seems like a lot of it is also energy, and I was just really struck by I initially listened to the article, and then I went to go take a screenshot for this talk and was really struck by this image. So it seems like the message is you can then really do it all. And there's a quote from a woman talking about how she can now work 18-hour days again with these supplements. Some pretty serious downsides that even the women in the study acknowledge, but still find it worth it. So I think just something really interesting to keep in mind as I talk today. And so I want to kind of move now into the realm of research in a little bit more seriousness, maybe not that much, but and talk a little bit about what testosterone is and what it does. And I want to just say from the start, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not talking about clinically low levels of testosterone. And I think even in these articles, I don't know that these women were like diagnosed. And I think, in fact, it's not FDA approved. And so I don't even know if they were diagnosed. There's nothing like, these are kind of off-label or, like not mainstream treatments. But I'm not talking about people with actual clinical levels of low hormones. So what is testosterone? This is a steroid hormone that is found in nearly all mammals and birds, vertebrates, And it's important for physical development and including sexual development and behavior regulation. And it is indeed higher in women than men. And one thing I want to argue throughout this talk is that it's important for both men and women. And there's some argument that maybe it plays a larger role among women because they do have lower levels. And I put just a quick, this is just from one study, but just to show you a sense, these are the distributions by sex. And so we've got women here and men here. And the point of this is just to show you don't see this all that often in terms of like gender or sex differences. So the differences are quite large and notable, which is not to say there isn't any overlap anywhere. They're not completely distinct, but the differences are large. And what's interesting, I think, from a psychological, especially a personality psychological perspective, is hormones and other hormones have these features as well, as they have both trait and state-like features. So on the one hand, our levels are relatively stable, especially if we measure them at the same time of day, a couple of days apart, let's say. They also have state-like features in that they change over the course of the day. So for most hormones, they start out higher in the morning and then decline across the day. They're quite responsive to like challenges and threats. So getting into a competition is likely to raise your testosterone, and more things that I'll talk about today. But I think this is interesting from a personality perspective. So you can think about it as kind of a trait-like feature that people have. And this idea of testosterone trade-offs came out of the animal literature, and specifically thinking about the ways that birds specifically were balancing sort of the cost and demand. So on the one hand, testosterone is in fact helpful for these things that you might think. So it increases in response to competition. It is higher when birds are aggressive, higher during mating season. But the downside of this is that it's metabolically costly. And it can be kind of like any other, like if you think about like a cortisol increase, right? This is helpful in the moment, but it has costs in other domains. And so any organism is not going to want to be kind of like full high level testosterone all the time. In part also because on the lower end, if you think about things like competition, aggression, that's not especially conducive to parenting, right? And relationship formation. So the idea here is that organisms may have lower testosterone when they're not actively seeking a mate or protecting their children. So instead, when they're caring for offspring and actually maintaining the relationships that they've already established, then lower testosterone might be more helpful. And so I want to just summarize, in general, the body of work on close relationships and now kind of moving into the human literature. So this is a kind of a general overview, but just to give you a sense of where I'm starting from. In general, there's a decent amount of evidence that people in relationships have lower testosterone than people who are single, and similarly that people who are parents have lower testosterone than people who do not have children. And there's not much work on the causality here, but there is evidence that it's because you could make the case that maybe lower testosterone people are more attractive as relationship partners, and it's actually the opposite. So it does seem that higher testosterone people are more likely to get into relationships, but then it declines once they're in those relationships. And in fact, there's not much on this, but there's at least one study showing that testosterone may change when people get divorced. So this was a study of men, but it may fluctuate in response to relationship status. And again, very little research, but there's some evidence that to the extent that fathers have lower testosterone, this is not like a permanent thing necessarily. So it may rebound when children are maybe around 6 months old. And some of the early work that I did found that, I think consistent with this idea that this is a focus on kind of caregiving or nurturance, that these differences are bigger among people who are more invested in these roles. So we found in one of my first study on testosterone was that both men and women who were partnered had lower testosterone, but only to the extent that they were sort of thinking about their relationship partner as they were not kind of interested in other relationships. So people who were partnered but open to other relationship partners did not show these kinds of differences. So some evidence that there's something, it's not just like, the mechanism I think is still a bit unclear, but it's not simply just I'm in a relationship, my testosterone is lower. There's something about the way you think about it. A lot of these findings, to the extent that they've been studied in women, do also seem consistent in women, or at least are not, it's not always consistent, at least in my read of the literature, like when you find effects for women versus when you don't. Most studies do not include women. And it's an interesting kind of disconnect too, because most parenting research focuses on mothers. But in this literature, the work focuses on fathers and testosterone. So there's really, really little work on mothers and testosterone. And so what I want to especially focus on today is kind of this last bit that I think is where I've taken this research. And what I think is most interesting is that within relationships, there's growing evidence that lower testosterone is associated with higher quality relationships and more effective, more nurturing caregiving. And so that's what I want to talk about in the studies that I'll be talking about today. And I do want to highlight that what's interesting to me is that if you think about any kind of relationship, right, this is a dyadic, like an inherently dyadic process. Most studies, most hormone work is not, even work looking at relationships is not dyadic. So it's just looking at one person. And it tends to be at one point in time as well. And I think there's some really interesting issues of causality here. So is it that, like first of all, like what's the mechanism that's leading to these differences? But is it that, are we really sort of cycling in and out of relationships, and maybe our hormones are changing along with it? And so without studying, like relationships aren't static one point in time. So limited longitudinal work, not all that much assessment of individual differences. And so I think where I always come back is like the why. Like I think the individual differences can help us understand why we see these differences. And as I mentioned, most research is on men. And so I think it's really interesting too to read the literature, because often it's often not clear, are there null effects in women, or is it that women just weren't included? And often women aren't included because they're like too complicated or something, like menstrual cycles. And it is, yes, it is complicated, but like certainly that the solution is not to not include them. And so I think you get this sort of biased overview of the literature that we should only be studying men, and it's mostly that we just don't have as much data on women. So I'm going to focus on sort of 3 sets of findings today. So starting at a one point in time study, so looking at relationship quality in couples, and that one probably carries through to some of the other studies, and then looking both at longer term changes over time and then shorter term changes in an experimental setting with relationship partners. So I'll start with, this is the first dyadic study that I ever did. And I was, again, really surprised to see that in the literature, there was this finding that, again, men with lower testosterone said they were happier in their relationships. And so no one had actually looked at any kind of dyadic associations. And so I was interested. We happened to have data that we could use to answer this question. And so we had 39 mixed-sex couples, and I tend to use gender, sex interchangeably. I mostly mean sex in this context because of these really large sex rather than gender differences, but I may slip up once in a while. And what we did is we measured, this was basically this was using some of our baseline data. Looking at kind of a simple question of, is relationship quality related to men's and women's testosterone, and are there associations within a relationship? And I'll just back up for 1 second, and I just talk about how we measure testosterone. So in most of these studies, we use what's called a passive drool. And one silver lining of the pandemic is now most of you are familiar with what I'm talking about. So you're just spitting into a tube, and that, it's harder. I had some empathy from my participants that it is kind of hard to get as much saliva as you need in these tubes. But we also try as best we can to run all of our samples in the afternoon to account for those daily diurnal changes. So there's less variability if you can wait until those times, unless that's what you're actually interested in, is like morning testosterone, which I have not looked at. We typically exclude anyone with hormone-related disorders. And one of the reasons why women it's sort of a thorny issue, including women, is that many women are on hormonal contraceptives, which in some cases are like the goal is to lower testosterone, and they do that is in fact what they do. So I've gone back and forth about this. Typically, I do exclude women on hormonal medication. I don't know if that is, there's pros and cons, right? Because if you want people in relationships who are not taking hormones, I think you're restricting your sample a little bit. So going back to our study, we had 3 kind of components of relationship quality that we measured. And I know many of you are probably very familiar with these. But just to walk you through them. So one is satisfaction. So this is, I think, like a current assessment of the relationship. And then we have commitment, which is more of a forward thinking, like I want this relationship to last. And the last one is investment. So thinking kind of how much have you put into this relationship? And one thing that's really nice about this is that, yes, they're positively correlated, but you can think about different combinations. So you could be very happy and not very committed, very invested and not very happy, things like that. And another little background piece. So what we were able to do here is, this is the, maybe not, the actor-partner, oh yeah, I do have it, actor-partner interdependence model. And so what we can do here is look at both men's and women's testosterone. And I want to caveat here and throughout the talk, these arrows are pointing, but I don't necessarily, I'm not arguing that this is the causal direction. It could certainly be that it works in both ways or the opposite way, but just for the statistical model. And so what we can look at here are both actor effects, so one partner's hormones affecting or being associated with their relationship quality, but also how their partner's hormones may be associated with these constructs. And one thing I'll note, just to keep in mind for other parts of the talk, is that men's and women's testosterone, and this is reasonably common, that their levels are correlated. So there's some medium-sized correlation, which I think is really interesting given the large sex differences. So that's also a reason why it makes sense for us to account for both. And so basically what we found is that we found positive associations for both satisfaction and commitment. So negative associations. So people who had higher testosterone reported being more satisfied and more commitment. Did I say that backwards again? Lower, okay. We didn't find a link with investment, which I think potentially may have something to do with the sample. So I think this one is more about in some ways how long you've been together, and we've got some range here, but not a ton. What's really interesting is we found really similar effects for partner effects. So when your partner has higher testosterone, you are also less, yes, sorry, this is gonna happen the whole hour, less satisfied and less committed. And we didn't find any gender differences or sex differences in either of these. And we do have a small sample, but if anything, actually, I take that back. We did find one interaction, and it was that the associations are stronger actually for women's hormones. And again, I think this could be a fluke. I don't know if this is like a consistent finding, but to the extent that women have lower testosterone, the variability may be more important. So this was actually the first study to look at these dyadic effects. And so I think it begs a lot of questions, and that I think carry throughout a lot of the other studies, that what's driving these effects? Is it spending time with your partner? Is it, the spoiler, I still don't totally know, but I think part of it must be your thinking. And I think some of the earlier studies suggest that how you're thinking about the relationship might play a role as well. And so I turned then to a set of longer term and shorter term changes, again, to try to understand how and why hormones might be changing. And one place that I turned was the transition to parenthood. And part of this came out of reading the literature and coming across, well, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'll just say that, as I'm sure you know, there are a lot of important changes that happen psychologically during pregnancy and early parenthood. But I was really interested in these physiological changes. And especially, I was coming across this like very limited evidence that men were showing hormone changes when their partners, mostly when they became fathers. There was a little bit during pregnancy, but that to me is like super interesting. And I was reading it in these hormone journals and just like why, like it seemed like it needed more attention. And like the why to me is remains still really interesting. And so just to give you a very brief overview, so as I mentioned, mothers and fathers have lower testosterone than people without children. But women show very large, like quite large increases in at least salivary testosterone while they're pregnant, and followed by postpartum decline. So what you can think about is like this hormone is increasing and then going even lower than perhaps it was before. Seems like it's functioning to like maintain the pregnancy. Like it doesn't, like it's like a lot of hormones are obviously changing, and there's sort of a sweet spot that if it goes up too much, that's a problem. If it's too low, that's a problem, but it's quite normative. And there's mechanisms that prevent it from, women don't feel like they're on like anabolic steroids, like even though they have these very high levels. Now fathers, much less evidence, but again, fathers seem to have lower testosterone than non-fathers, and there's like a little bit of evidence for that it's not, again, just maybe people want to have children with lower testosterone men. There seems to be evidence for a decline. And so all of this got us thinking about, first of all, when do these changes begin? Because again, a question that often comes up is like, what if, think about like deployment or something, like what if the father is not around? Like, would you still show these changes? Which got me thinking, again, this should probably be sex. Like, it's probably not a function of biological relatedness, or like seems implausible, but so would we see the same processes in a female co-parent, for instance? And also, what are the implications of these changes? So it seems so far, like the argument is that this might be adaptive, right? So when you have a newborn, maybe not helpful to be looking for other partners, being very aggressive, you want to be more nurturing. And then the last question is kind of to follow that thread of, are these levels associated with couples, and are there implications of that link? So what we did is we've got sort of two sets of couples, about half mixed sex, half same sex, expecting their first child in these. So they did not have any other children. They were largely in the Ann Arbor area. We had some, it was harder than I thought it would be to get the same sex couples. So some of those are from kind of further away. And to the extent that we were able to get them, we had them come in for 4-week sessions or mail in the saliva samples. And we have a lot of other measures in the study, but I'm just gonna focus on the testosterone assessments and the assessments of relationship quality and parenting. And we also had online follow-ups at 3 and 9 months postpartum. We unfortunately do not have hormone data from that assessment, which I really wish we had, but it is what it is. So let me just show you kind of an orientation of what is going on. And this, I think, is really interesting if you haven't seen it before. Like, these are pretty large changes. So this is mother's testosterone over the week of pregnancy. And so I'm just plotting all the individual time points here, but it's a pretty large increase and very similar. I mean, I don't have any reason to think I would see a different pattern in the same-sex couples, but I'm separating them partly because we had slightly different assays for them, which makes combining them complicated. But what I think is so this is like, if we hadn't found this, I think this would be a problem. So this is like interesting, but as expected. What we also found, though, was these small decreases or declines in expectant fathers' testosterone. And one thing, so again, small but reliable and sort of gradual. Like it's like this linear decline. And again, I think we're looking at the y-axis here. So we've got just comparing between men and women. So toward the end here, I mean, women's levels are getting to the levels of men, which I think when we actually got these assays done, the lab tech was like, this is wild, like what's going on here? Like she hadn't run pregnant women before. And so the next thing we were able to do is look at the correlates or sort of the outcomes of these changes. So again, presuming that these changes are adaptive, that these declines are adaptive. So we have these same measures about relationship quality at 3 months. And then we added a couple of parenting measures. So how much do you feel like you're being supported by your partner? Division of labor was really interesting. So who is doing what at home? And we separated division of household labor from division of infant care. Because there might be some like trade-offs. Like it might be that mothers are doing more infant care and perhaps fathers or co-parents are doing more household labor. And so what I'm going to do, there's kind of a lot of findings. So I'm just going to kind of summarize them in general because they all are fairly consistent. And it's a little tricky because it's either lower levels or larger declines, because in women, prenatally, testosterone is going up, so larger declines or smaller increases. But I think of it as lower testosterone kind of in general. And it's a little tricky also because given that we didn't find changes in the mixed sex couple, the co-parents, there's less kind of room for things to be predicting outcomes. But in general, when mothers had lower, sort of smaller increases in testosterone prenatally, and keeping in mind, so all of the hormone data is prenatal, they reported that they were doing more engaged in infant care, they were happier in their relationships, so higher commitment and satisfaction. Really similar patterns for fathers. So they were also reporting, so again, when they were showing larger declines prenatally, they were reporting greater relationship satisfaction, investment, commitment. They were doing more at home. They were perceiving more support from their partner. And similar patterns for non-birth mothers. So they were also, and this is then going to be not a decline, but a lower average testosterone. They were more involved in infant care and household labor, receiving more support from their parents and more invested in their relationships. And these I should mention, so these are all actor effects. We also found some really interesting partner effects. So including that fathers are reporting that they got more support from their pregnant partner, or I guess now these are all postpartum. So, but when mothers had lower prenatal testosterone, fathers reported getting more support from them postpartum. Similar effects for the non-birth mothers. And what's nice with the partner reports too is you can kind of get some confirmation from the mother. So mothers are reporting that they got more help from fathers who showed lower testosterone during the prenatal period. And again, pretty similar findings with sort of minus the change, but lower testosterone associated with better outcomes postpartum. So I would take all of this to suggest that there does seem to be something functional here, right? That lower testosterone seems to be promoting better relationship outcomes. And we also found that within the sample of mixed sex couples, there were significant within couple correlations. And this is work that Darby Saxby, who was here a couple weeks ago, helped with and kind of led this paper, but she was really interested in that coordination of hormones and found that there, again, was this positive association, which again, I think is really interesting if you consider that they're moving in opposite directions. So like, it's interesting to me to think about what might be going on there. And fathers, and she was, in this paper, we focused on fathers, but fathers who showed higher correlations with their partner reported at the postpartum assessment being more satisfied, committed, and invested. And we also controlled for initial levels in this analysis, and it doesn't seem to be the case that it's initial levels predicting the decline. Instead, it seems to be the decline is predicting these outcomes. So maybe one kind of hint about the direction of causality here. We also found a significant, kind of a very similar pattern within the same sex or same gender couples. We didn't find any links with any outcomes, but I someday intend to maybe, now that I know more how to analyze the data, maybe to revisit this. Okay, so again, I think these longitudinal studies can help to understand a little bit about the mechanisms, possibly about the direction of causality. But one thing that we wanted to turn to next is doing shorter term experiments in the lab to try to more tightly control and understand the conditions under which testosterone may change. But sort of keeping this general framework of what are the contexts that should elicit testosterone declines. And so this first study, this was actually a collaboration with Brenda, and Rich is involved in this study as well, has a really cool sample of transition to second parenthood. So this was a sample of mostly dyads, so about 300 parents interacting with their 1-year-old infants. And this is, I believe these were the second children, yes? Yeah, if they already have a child, yeah, I think, yeah, it must be if it's transitioned, yeah. So with their younger child. And what they did in this study is they had both parents, so counterbalance order of mothers versus fathers, but both parents came into the lab and did both a teaching task and then the strange situation task, which I believe, I don't know if other speakers have talked about the strange situation, but basically a stressor. This is a stressful context for infants. So mom or dad is coming and going. It's designed to stress out the infant. And it's not stressful for the parents as well. So they are, your child is crying. Your job is to really serve as this attachment figure. And so this seemed like a really great context to understand how parents' hormones might be changing. And there's some evidence to suggest that, again, fathers' testosterone tends to decline when they engage with their children, not so much in like kind of day-to-day stuff, but more stressful interactions, and very little data from mothers. So we were able to, or Brenda had collected saliva samples before and after these interactions and a bunch of individual difference measures. And I want to talk about one individual difference measure that is near and dear to my heart, attachment avoidance. So this kind of my other line of research, my earlier research was focused on individual differences in attachment. And I've always been really interested in attachment avoidance, which is essentially a discomfort with closeness and intimacy. So endorsed by questions like, I find it difficult to depend on other people. I don't like anyone getting too close to me. And some of the early research that I did, and a lot of other people's work too, suggests that people with a more avoidant orientation have difficulty receiving and providing support. And one of the things that I've always found really interesting about avoidance is there's often like a disconnect between what they might be saying and how they're feeling. So they sort of, the goal is to kind of remain cool, calm, and collected, and often physiological measures might suggest otherwise. And the other thing that was really interesting to me is that these are measures. Typically, avoidance is measured in the context of your romantic relationship. So I don't like romantic partners to get too close, or I find it difficult to depend on romantic partners. But one of the earlier studies that I did suggested that these measures still have implications for the way we interact with children as well. And so probably, yes, at like a more precise measure about caregiving, you might see stronger correlations with behavior, but the idea that the way we think about our romantic relationships bleeds over into other relationships, I think makes a lot of sense to me. So all of that is to say that Brenda had a measure of attachment avoidance. And so I thought, again, sort of a helpful piece to think about why hormones might be changing, and for whom. So what did we find? All right, so what we found is that, and it's nice to have this comparison. So what I am measuring here is percent change in testosterone, which is what I'll talk about in the next couple of studies as well. So kind of controlling for baseline levels because the individual differences are quite large. So the change following the play task was not statistically significant, but there was a significant drop following the strange situation. And we found this for both men and women. And one way in which this is helpful is that, as I mentioned, hormones decline across the course of the day. And so there's a sense in which, like, just having people do nothing, you might see a decline. And so it's helpful to see, okay, like now we're seeing more of a decline. And so sometimes when you see like no change, it might be evidence for an increase, if that makes sense. So you're expecting a decline, but then if you intervene, you might see an increase. And we did find a gender difference here that this effect, this decline, was smaller among more avoidant fathers. So suggesting that there was something about this interaction that perhaps it wasn't linked with their actual behavior, but that maybe they're engaging less with it, they're getting less out of it. I don't have strong explanations for why we didn't find these effects with mothers. My guess is this is less of a novel task for mothers, but I don't know that for sure, that it may have been sort of less threatening. Like I do think this is like a great task to elicit these avoidant defenses. So this is this child that is like trying to get your attention and trying to get comfort. And so I think that it is likely quite stressful for avoidant parents. And what I wanted to turn to next is kind of thinking about this paradigm. So so I think it's a pretty well established that interacting with your child, in these sort of nurturing caregiving situations seems to cause testosterone to decline. And I am interested in whether there might be like a parallel for in romantic couples. And so one study that we did, and this was led by Christy Chin, who was one of my former grad students, and posed for all of these pictures that I will probably use forever. And again, trying to think about what is a task that we could use that might elicit testosterone declines within romantic couples. So we brought in a sample of dating or married couples, and we had them do a semi-structured conversation task. And probably people may be familiar with this fast friends task, especially in this audience. Let me see. I mean, if you're not, it got a lot of attention about 10 years ago. There was got an article in the New York Times. It's a set of questions, and they were actually designed to be used with unacquainted dyads, so getting to know strangers. And the questions in the fast friends condition get gradually more intimate and more, they elicit self-disclosure. So for instance, when's the last time you cried in front of someone? What is your most treasured memory? I think there's ones about, they get pretty deep, versus when was the last time you walked for more than an hour? My students got really excited about real versus fake Christmas trees, like discuss. And what was really interesting to me, okay. So people provided saliva samples before and after, completed a bunch of questionnaires. Couples really, really enjoyed the task. And even the control condition, like they were like, can I take them with me? Which was really interesting and fun. And I think possibly problematic for, I don't know, like it's really hard because you want it to be sort of emotionally neutral but engaging. And in fact, they found it as enjoyable. The conditions didn't differ in terms of positive or negative affect, but there were small differences in how much people disclosed, which is kind of like a manipulation check, and how close they felt to their partner. But I think it may be part of I don't know if it's a problem, but like I think the effects were quite small because the couples really enjoyed the control condition, which I think is really interesting. But I think overall, it was a great task to use. And so again, I was expecting, and we sort of designed this thinking this would be like this emotionally intimate task and we might see declines in testosterone. But in fact, we saw increases. And this was true for both men and women. And so this was like really puzzling to us. And it's now we've had some time to like think about it and discuss. And I think, so one thing that we did find is that these differences were partially explained by greater self-disclosure. But again, like I was thinking of self-disclosure as this like nurturant activity. It seems like the differences were not explained by how attracted do you feel to your partner, how stressed out are you, like basically anything that we asked. So it is sort of tricky. And I think and we have like video, all these are videotaped and everything, but looking back at the videos and also how much people were enjoying these tasks, I think a bit of it was like quite novel. It was, I think people were reporting being like attracted to their partner. Like I think it was like a manipulation that we didn't really intend for it to be. And it's really hard. And that's where I'm sort of still thinking like or maybe that's not even a task we're thinking about. Like, is there a task that might be more parallel to like caring for your child? And so doing kind of more reading after the fact, there are some people that have argued that any interaction with your romantic partner or a potential partner might raise testosterone. So it may be sort of, this is like having like sexual partners around may just be increasing testosterone, but especially in this kind of novel context. So the last study then is some newer data that, and again, I think I'm sort of stuck on this, like, what is the context? What is the task? When does testosterone change in close relationships? And so this is a study that Amy and her lab and I have collected using what's called an infant simulator. This is like a fake baby that cries. You program it to cry at various intervals. And we sent couples home with this simulator. So these are couples without children. And we sent them home with these infants. Half of them were programmed to wake up a lot during the night, and half just slept for like 9 hours. And Amy and I both had different kind of interests going into this. But one thing that I was really interested in is, okay, maybe this is an interesting task, right? So one piece of this was that we had people come into the lab on 2 sessions and learn how to care for this infant. So they were doing this kind of joint caregiving task, which I think is interesting for a lot of reasons. So these are people without children. We had them do like a puzzle task in the background. So it was a little bit of multitasking. So, because there's not like, the baby cries every once in a while, you do a thing and it stops. Like there's not that much to do, but I think maybe someday we can look at like who is doing what. Like I find that so interesting. Like how are they dividing this up? Are they fighting about it? Kind of how does it go? But what we have currently is we have pre and post saliva samples. So again, to look at how hormones may change over the course of this interaction. Right. And the infant itself actually collects data. So it will report like how, it reports your performance. So how basically every time it cries, and I think there's like 4 or 5 things that you need to do. So like it might be hungry, it might be needed diaper change, and you sort of have to figure out what it is the thing. And when you do the thing, you get like a point, or it's calculating something, but basically how effective you are at caring for this infant. So we have both like the infant report and parents' reports of how fun was this, how stressful was this, and so on. And this is actually Rachel Brandon, one of my current grad students who just had a real baby, was the lead on this paper. And so I guess I gave it away on the title. But basically what we found, so what I'm plotting here is change in testosterone, and I'm breaking it down by session. By condition. We didn't find differences as a function of condition, but it is like, small sample. But what we found is that in the first session, there is essentially no change. So these are not significantly different from 0, but in the second session, there was a decline in both conditions. And so again, kind of like a puzzle, like what might be going on here? And I think what we're trying to piece together, what we're arguing, is that there may be something about kind of caring for this infant over the weekend, getting some practice with the infant, maybe something about the novelty too. And again, we probably could look more at this, like, it could be that for some couples, this is really cool and exciting and novel. And again, it may be like this fast friends task that you're getting to know your partner in a way that you might not have. These differences, so we look specifically at what might explain, like what's going on in session 2 that wasn't going on in session 1. It's not about their evaluations of how it went. The infant-generated data were not explaining this differences either. And so then we looked at a couple of moderators specifically related to caregiving. So we had asked participants, how comfortable are you with babies? And how much do you value parenting? And these were all people who said they did not have children, but were thinking about it in the next 5 years. So pretty broad, but like possible. We also asked them at the end, I don't know if we've looked at this, like, do you still want to have kids? Like, how do you feel about it now? And so what we found is that these, again, looking at what might moderate the difference, and we are seeing evidence that people who are less comfortable with babies are actually showing this more of a change between sessions. So people who are more comfortable, and I think worth noting that probably around here is like no change, right? So people who are more comfortable are showing I don't know if that is significant or not, but a decline in both sessions. Whereas the bigger differences are people who are less comfortable with babies. So maybe that first session was just kind of jarring and confusing, but now they're experts, arguably, by the second session. And I should say, I don't know if I said this, that these are separated over a weekend, so they had three nights with the baby at home. Similar pattern of findings about value for parenting. So again, people who were reporting at the beginning that they didn't place a lot of value on parenting were showing like larger differences between the two sessions. So I think, again, suggesting we didn't have a measure of like novelty, which I think might be what differentiates those two sessions, but starting to think about like what might be different between these two sessions that we're seeing essentially, I think just going back here, like the decline is what we would have expected. And so it's interesting to me that we're seeing what we would have expected, but only in the second session. So thinking a little bit about what might be going on there. Okay. So just to sum up across these studies, so I think the evidence is pretty good that that lower testosterone seems to be associated with nurturant, higher quality relationships among both men and women. So I find gender differences or sex differences sometimes, not always. A lot of dyadic associations, which I think are really worth pursuing. And the short and longer term changes are generally linked with nurturant experiences and transitions, but with potentially, I think this difference between the relationship type might be really important. So there obviously are large differences between romantic relationships and parent-child relationships. But I think, like thinking about it from an attachment perspective, there's also a lot of overlap. And so thinking about what might be different between those different kinds of interactions may be important. So to return where I started, I think I every once in a while will do some Googling or look at when I get mentioned on Twitter. And it often, so I would say one of the most common questions I get, or like why someone is talking about one of my studies, is like, this is a big problem. Like, what should men do? Like, reporters want to know, like, how do men fix this? And like, first of all, I think hopefully you will see this. The changes are very small. Like, and the between person differences are so much bigger than any change any man might see. So like I don't think this is cause for an alarm, right? But I think that is kind of the narrative sometimes. But I have seen a little bit more coverage occasionally. So here's one: testosterone promotes cuddling, not just aggression, at least in animals. And then at least a little bit of questioning, like new fathers lose testosterone, maybe they don't really want it back. And then finally, I just want to put a plug in. So if this is interesting to you, I'm going to be organizing this seminar next semester. And so I just wanted to leave you with a little teaser. So this is all who will be coming next semester. So I hope you all will come. And if you're a student, maybe take the course. And I assume this will be circulated soon at some point. I guess I am done a little early, but I just wanted to thank my collaborators and students, and thank you all for listening. Sure.
Thanks, Robin. Sorry if I missed this. In the last study, were the effects the same for both partners in terms of testosterone changes?
Like in terms of men and yes.
Was it all mixed gender?
No.
Okay.
So we didn't find sex differences.
Okay.
But this is always like a tricky thing, right? So there we have, I forget, I don't know if I reported on there. We have some 4, like maybe like some too small to do anything with and too big to like drop them. So Yeah. So no sex differences, but
Any partner effects?
no.
Okay.
No.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's hard with a small sample to like be too confident about that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, one thing I was thinking about kind of the first bar graph, the sleep deprived group is really getting more practice caring for the baby.
interesting. Yeah.
So when they come back into the lab, it's maybe less stressful than the control group that hasn't been like woken up at night, and they have
Interesting.
just one thought. They've had less practice over the weekend, and so maybe that could explain differences between in the green.
Yeah, it's interesting that right, and I guess maybe is what you're saying. The differences in the sleep deprivation are smaller.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they've like had all this practice. Yes, they're sleep deprived, and I understand that hypothesis, but
right. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
And I do believe we did look at this. I think they found the experience more negative also. So I don't know if they're also just like done with, but again, they're showing less of it. I mean, again,
like less reactive.
Unclear, right?
Yeah.
But this may just be they're more used to it. Yeah.
Thanks so much. This is really interesting.
Thank you.
Oh yeah.
This is just a quick. Okay. Yeah, just quick question or thought. I know you were talking about trying to find a parallel task for couples that might be similar to like nurturing or caregiving.
Yeah.
Do you think social support conversations are similar?
Maybe.
Or are they different? I'm trying to like.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like some kind of caregiving, but I also feel like that often involves like physical contact. So I think we were trying, but which doesn't have to be a social support. It doesn't necessarily have to. But yeah, I think and maybe this is a good model. Maybe we should have had them come back with the fast friends and do it again or something. Like maybe once you get past the novelty and you can actually talk about, yeah.
Wait, what were you saying though? Why would it be different? The physical?
I think anything like, and I do think this happened maybe a little bit in the fast friends. I think anytime you're like touching your partner, I might expect testosterone to go up. So I would like to remove that if possible.
Okay.
Which I don't think is necessarily going to be the case for social support conversation. But I think any kind of like a strange situation parallel with adults, you might get more like touching.
Interesting.
But I think, yeah, like maybe a different kind of conversation could be interesting. I mean, it might just be that this is like not a construct that makes a lot of sense in romantic partners, but that is interesting, I think, as well.
I can need my steps.
Thank you so much. This is so interesting.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around what testosterone means in all of these different contexts. And I can't help but wonder what else might be happening in the body. And so, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that like testosterone is negatively related with like cortisol and other hormones. And so I'm just curious, is there anything else that also tends to occur in these different contexts, or is there something special about testosterone that kind of explains these dynamics?
So one thing I can say that with the transition to parenthood, I think one thing that is tricky is that men are also gaining weight. And so that can lower your testosterone. I mean, aging. And one thing that I think, and I don't remember if we ever got this from reviewers, but like, it's possible that I don't think I would expect that much of a decline in testosterone just from as a function of aging. But like ideally you would want like a control group that is not expecting, but like that just feels like a huge waste of resources. So I think, I think that may be a piece of it with the fatherhood, that whatever is happening with women, like you may also be exercising less, sleeping less. Which is like a little bit less interesting, I think, than like the mental preparation. In the other context, so you're thinking other like bodily systems. Yeah, I'm trying to, I must have looked at the data for this study with cortisol. I know in the interaction in the Fast Friends study, we just, because we were so surprised by the finding that we just did everything we could think of to try to understand it. And so we assayed cortisol. Cortisol also goes up. But again, I don't know that it was like stressful. Like I think it was like activating, like a challenge. Yeah. Like, would you expect like it's sort of like a challenge? Maybe. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Or maybe especially, like I see some of those questions, like I've tried to use some of those questions in like a class and I'm like, oh, I wouldn't want to answer that. Like they're deep, you know? So yeah, so I think cortisol is a possibility. What did you have anything else? Is that the main one you were thinking? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the piece of it that's interesting to me is that kind of the neglected like benefits of the lower. And so I know that like, yeah, I mean, I think there are situations where you would see cortisol and testosterone changing in the same way. So like infant defense or something like that. But I think that's the piece that to me, like the fluctuations between different contexts are really interesting. I don't know if that's a super comprehensive answer, but.
So, kind of along a similar line, but not exactly. You kind of mentioned this at the beginning, and I could like it seemed to follow through all of the studies that you referenced throughout the talk. There isn't a whole lot of research on it, and that which we do have isn't usually causal, and it's a lot of like really small sample sizes. So it sounds like maybe the data isn't particularly good.
Yeah, I think it's noisy. Yeah.
And which makes sense because testosterone, obviously, it's one of the big hormones. It responds to a bunch of stuff and it does a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah.
So what do you think like a future of this research looks like to make the data better and more useful?
Yeah, I think bigger samples for sure. And one thing, I didn't mention this, but I think this is the case, I think, for most relationships research, like, but particularly like the transition to parenthood study. These are such high functioning couples that like I had never actually that was the first study I think that I did that wasn't college students. And I was like, I thought it was a mistake. Like they are just extremely committed, very happy. Like even when you ask them, they're like, this is a weird question. And so I think we were at ceiling in a lot of things. And so I think getting a bigger variety of couples, bigger samples, I think the birth control issue is also like a thorny one. Like I think if I had unlimited money, I would like test whether it matters. Like my experience has been when you include women on contraceptives, like the findings are just wiped out. And so it feels like a waste. But then I think that's an important population of women. And so I think that piece is tricky. So I think one thing that I think would be really cool is to follow people over different contexts. So like I really think there is maybe just that one study of like men who are getting divorced, but like seeing how responsive are these changes. I think even like a daily like home versus work kind of like flexibility or like that. I think that would be really interesting. But I do think like we just need more people and more like, I mean, you always get like, this is the problem too with like same-sex couples are super interesting too, but then we often don't collect enough of them to look at them in a meaningful way. And so it's just kind of like I would like to do more of that with more resources. Is that kind of helpful?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Robin. So I think there is some research in the field of aging that it does decline in men, right? Often associated with bone loss as well. So, however, I was just thinking it would be. I don't know if anyone's done this, but it would sort of be fun to look at grandparents.
Yeah.
At couples
definitely.
who are about to become a grandparent, right?
Yeah, I think that'd be really
and
cool.
in that context, do some couple studies in terms of the anticipation and whether you see some similar fluctuations or changes in testosterone, right?
I think that'd be really cool. And I think then you don't have the issue of someone being pregnant or on birth control. And I was just reading something about this because I kind of went on a deep dive of why women are taking testosterone in later age. And it seems like there was some literature I feel like the media is like, there's a sharp decline. And then I think the studies suggest it's gradual. Like it's not like this precipitous decline that I think people are trying to market. So I think that could be really interesting. And I know of almost no research, at least off the top of my head, among older people. And I think, in fact, we often, which I don't even know if that makes sense. Like I think when you're studying undergrads, it makes sense to not, like we usually have a cutoff of like 40 for, who knows, I don't know. But like, right. So, but I think you could also move it all later and just study that group. And I think that would be really cool.
It's quite a bit of research just on grandparenting, right? But I haven't ever seen it in this sort of context.
Or even having grandparents like interact with the kids. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, that'd
be
be really
the whole
cool.
thing. The study set up.
Transition to
interacting with their new grandchild, all different sorts of things, right?
Yeah, I think that'd be really cool, actually. Yeah. So as far as I know, there's there might be one study. There's almost no data on that. Yeah. So another, I think, totally interesting question would be like surrogacy, adoption. Yeah, like I think the one study I can think of might be like male couples who are adopting and they found similar, but I don't remember the details of it. So basically no. Yeah. So I think that would be super cool because I think it also helps you like get at the mechanism. Like I still keep thinking about what is it that's what is it that's happening? Like, and like in my head, it's like that people are like mentally preparing, except that doesn't totally map onto like what animals are probably doing. So I'm not totally sure, but I think that would help answer the question. I think that would be really cool.
So I could ask you many questions and I will at some point. We've talked about a lot of it, but I was thinking about connecting this with Tatum's model and thinking about sort of the formation of relationships as motivated performance situations and whether you think, I was just trying to puzzle it out and I'm curious your thoughts. So initially you would expect testosterone.
I think yes. And definitely, and I don't know if you've come across like there's a few speed dating studies where it seems like there is this increase. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But then one of her questions, right, is like, when does it stop being a motivated performance situation? I was curious if you think that mapping like declines in testosterone that initial relationship period would be informative.
Or like, and I don't know if this is something you could even get that specific at, but like when does it change? And I think the limited data, so that one study that I did, and then Sarah Van Anders has some other studies that it really seems to be about, and maybe different for men and women. So like women, I believe her finding was that women show lower testosterone both when they're in a relationship and when they have like a casual relationship. Whereas men look single when they're both single and in a casual relationship. So like and I think that's mostly, I bet if you drill down, it's like the way you're thinking about the relationship. So that would be really cool. Like, and maybe discrepancies too. Like, I think when is that point when you're like, okay, like it must be too, like not looking for other partners, kind of settling in. And I don't know at what point that happens. I think we do often find that it's correlated with relationship length, I believe, in the way that you'd expect. But I don't know if we always have like enough of a range. But yeah, I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, but your data suggests it might even be that the hormones precede the,
or at least maybe, right. And I think other people's data too, like it's definitely not the case that it's just that lower testosterone people get into relationships. I mean, that would be super interesting too. So then, yeah, like who are the most appealing relationship partners? And it seems like too that, and again, no data on this, but probably the most appealing relationship partners are people who can go back and forth easily, who are like start out really, I don't know what that looks like, but like charming and engaging, and then can kind of shift. I mean, now I sound like I'm talking about it like a psychopath or something, but I think in a more functional way, like in adapting to like, now I'm in a relationship and I can, chill out and not be looking at other people all the time. Yeah. But yeah, I Googled, well, during your talk, like, is there any data on testosterone in the challenge model, that threat challenge?
Not that I.
Because I didn't find, I mean, it was just like on my phone yeah. So I think it would be interesting. Yeah, like certainly like in that initial context, I think. And I want to say there may be some data, like Rich Slatcher might have data that when people click, like, or maybe that people click with high testosterone men, something like that, maybe, that it was interesting, but like kind of an older study. Yeah, like I find that, like, it's hard because there's just like one study on this, but it's like, it feels very piecemeal. But I think like there's certainly something, and I think there's also data that like there's something that people are picking up on, that these people are more attractive. I just came in my like Googling before this, there's a study that people are picking up scents of higher testosterone people, like maybe from their sweaty t-shirts or something, which is interesting. Oh, so hey, you could add that to like get some like sweat, I don't know, something. Just have people go around and smell each other. Yeah. But apparently there's something you can detect in people's body odor.
Any more questions? Last call?
Nope.
Okay. Well, the mic, so we're recording this.
This is just a quick question, but I'm curious if you would ever consider administering testosterone to like look at experimental effects.
I mean, maybe and I think part of this is my like inclination as a personality psychologist. Like I'm much less drawn to like, let's artificially manipulate the thing that we think is interesting. But I'm not like opposed. I mean, if I could, I guess we could do this. Couldn't we like artificially lower it? Like, I bet you could do some kind of like, I mean, I guess I don't know exactly what the mechanism would be for that, but that I would be interested in. I think I worry about like I have a lot of now. Okay, I worry about what that would mean, but now apparently we've got this sample of women who are doing this to themselves. Like maybe that is an interesting sample, like that I don't have to then be involved in. Like this may have changed, but my understanding was that I don't know how much of that we are able to do, and maybe not with women, but that may have changed. Like I haven't looked into it. So yeah, I think it could be interesting, but yeah, maybe I'll try to get these women who are multitasking and having these great lives that can come talk to me.
Good. Well, thank you very much,
Thanks.
Robin, and we look forward to next semester.
Yeah.